p.m. We are being video broadcast,
recorded out live, yep.
going out live and being recorded. First up is administrative items, and apparently we have none.
There are not.
So next would be planner's report.
Yes. First item on the planner's report is an update on our Buzzards Bay National Estuaries Program culvert replacement grant. This is for those culverts at Cornell Road at Angeline Brook, Drift Road at Snow Creek, and Drift Road at Lions Brook. And we're partnering with Buzzards Bay Coalition to administer this grant. As I've previously given you all an update, they have some of their own grant funds that they're contributing to this project. So they have contracted with Gomez and Sullivan engineers to begin studying and building the base level data for developing designs. And so they're doing the data collection right now over the course of this month, and then they'll eventually use this data to develop a conceptual design for Cornell Road at Angeline Brook. The reason why we're not doing all three is just due to the expense of developing those designs. We have to dial it back, but at least there will be that baseline data available to the town should we find funds for further design work.
I know that there are two branches of Angeline Brook that cross Adamsville Brook. But are there two that cross Cornell, or have they combined by that time into one?
I can't recall.
There's a single branch on Cornell.
All right, an update on.
Is this just for design? It says the contract ends in November this year. I'm looking at the notes of the culvert protection. So this is not, doesn't involve the construction?
It does not involve construction. It's just going to bring it, Angeline Brook, to a conceptual design level. So it would be incumbent on the towns, then to try to find funds for a full design, and then to go get permitting and secure funds for construction.
Okay, how big is the grant?
These are relatively small. I think Buzzards Bay has about $90,000 to spend on this, and the town, maybe you were working on that. I think it was maybe 50 or 60. I can't recall.
And do we have any, they're going to start from scratch, trying to figure out what to do, and then propose that, I guess. So, okay.
Yeah, they'll develop a concept that we can then use to go look for other grant funds to build out a fully engineered design that we would use to go secure permits and ultimately construct. Next is our short-term rental survey. So if you recall, in our May meeting, the planning board voted to recommend that the short-term rental committee continues its work even though we vote for the proposed bylaws fail at town meeting. And so before we even have the short-term rental committee meet again, I wanted to develop some data to better inform where the bylaw should go. And I think we really need to have that in place to get community preferences, have some figures to put to the community preferences, so that way if we do take something to town meeting again, we're more likely to succeed. So I drafted this survey with Jim and the chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Roger Menard, and we're going to leave this up until July, beginning of July, and then we'll summarize the data, provide it to the planning board, and I also provided an option for survey respondents to get that summary data as well, and so they'll receive that. And I think we'll really be able to have a better indication of where things should head with the short-term rental committee at the time.
Okay.
And finally, I have a letter in front of all of you, which is a draft support letter to the town's application to the National Coastal Resilience Fund. This is a program through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation that we've been talking about over the past couple of months. We made it through the pre-application round, which was pretty competitive. They had something like 700 applications, and it was whittled down to 200, so we still have quite a bit of competition in the grant fund, but we at least made it through that initial round. This is, again, this is for developing a coastal resilience plan in cooperation with Little Compton and Dartmouth. So if we receive funding for this, we'll look at what we can do locally to improve resilience in areas that we haven't looked at in prior planning documents. So in areas, like for example, salt marshes or the head of Westport, developing some concepts for improving resilience in those types of areas. So like for the planning board to endorse that letter.
This letter here.
And it's there for your signature as well, Jim.
Michael, have you seen or heard any feedback from the other towns, namely Little Compton and Dartmouth, as to their support or lack thereof so far for this?
So they're fully engaged with this process, and they have been from the conception of the idea of doing a regional grant application. Both town managers and, well, the assistant town manager in Dartmouth is very supportive of this, and so is the town manager in Little Compton. So if the town were to receive funding, each municipality would be responsible for doing their own sort of public engagement and doing the project management for their own community. The way it would work is that Westport would be the go-between for the funds, and I still need to work out how we would administer that with our finance office. But yeah, we would be kind of doing the overarching project management of saying, okay, Little Compton, Dartmouth, we need to have these particular deliverables assembled, but when it actually comes to doing the work in that community, they would be working with whoever we end up consulting with, as well as their own people in their conservation commission and their planning board or whatever.
And we're getting help from EA Engineering?
That's correct. EA Engineering is assisting us with this grant application entirely with no cost to the towns.
And just for full disclosure, is my cousin Sam White at EA Engineering that has pushed this. EA Engineering is doing it without his
But
direct support.
he is not involved with this process. The two folks I'm directly involved with Sam White.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve sending this letter?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
There is.
That's pretty cheeky of you to sign that before the motion.
Okay.
And that's all I have for the planner's report, but we have a couple of minutes left, so we can do the minutes as well.
So let's do the minutes. Minutes of June 4th.
Mr. Chair, I've read the minutes of June 4th, and I think they're complete and accurate, so I will move approval of the minutes of June 4th.
I second
Are there any other comments?
Well, I can approve them only up to 7:08 when I left the meeting.
Okay, so noted. All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, I know we have a couple of minutes before 6:15. I would bring up something that I've talked to Michael Burris and communicated to you about. It has some relationship to culverts and a lot of our other work, certainly work that we're thinking about under Climate Resilience Committee. And that is a communication that I received and forwarded to Michael Burris from, that Mark Rasmussen received from USGS about information from the tide gauge in Woods Hole that NOAA operates their hydrological arm, which we've relied on a lot in terms of sea level rise. And what it's shown in the past is, you know, a jagged line that goes up gradually. But what was notable or alarming is a 15 centimeter rise since 2022. And that's about 6 inches in less than 2 years, or about 2 years. And when Mark asked the person at USGS, that person described it as a bump. And I know that, you know, we're about to have a heat wave for the next week. Some occurrences, like heat waves, can be described as bumps. That is, temperature goes up and then it goes down. But my understanding of sea level rise is, while there are, with tides and currents and other things like that, things that make it go up and down, it's harder to describe sea level rise with a word like bump. It tends to go up. And I suggested to Mark that, you know, because I'm on the board of the coalition, that it would be really good to have someone from USGS or NOAA tell us about what's behind this information, what's behind the word bump, because the coalition spends a lot of resources, you know, trying to protect salt marshes. And by the way, we lost a giant in the field of salt marshes, John Teal, on Friday, who wrote the seminal book on salt marshes. With that kind of advancement and acceleration, it really, if that's what it is, if it's not a bump that's going to come down for some reason, a current change in the Gulf Stream or whatever, then, for example, Bob Daler's subcommittee on infrastructure, you know, it has impacts in the way we go about thinking about culverts, the way we go about thinking about salt marshes, the islands in the Westport River, escape routes. A lot of the work that the planning board does, that committees involved in climate resilience. So I think that the first thing to do is to get someone who knows about this stuff, which isn't me, to come and probably address the Climate Resilience Committee and say, what's behind these numbers? What might be causing it? And is this an aberration, or is this a trend, or what's it likely to lead to, so that we can think about what that means for all the things that we've been working on in this board, and, you know, other parts of town government.
Yeah, I think that that's completely something that we should ask them to come and talk to us.
Yeah.
Because, for instance, when I put my motorboat in the water at Spindle Rock 2 weeks ago, or whatever it was, getting back to my house on the West Branch, I couldn't see a single marsh.
Yeah.
They're completely underwater.
And that's
So,
what
which
got
is-
Mark to think about it. He went and he couldn't see the marsh.
So, anyway, keep us informed. Okay, it is now beyond the 6:15 time allotted for Corey Estates. I'd like to open the public hearing, the 6:15 public hearing for Corey Ridge Estates, file number 23-035C, continued from November 14th, 2024, January 23rd, 2024, March 19th, 2024, and May 21st, 2024. Request by the applicant to consider a definitive subdivision plan entitled Definitive Subdivision Corey Ridge Estates, located at 265 Cornell Road.
Good evening. Once again, for the record, Sean Leach, Northeast Engineers, representing Byron Giblin for Corey Ridge Estates. We're here tonight because there was one outstanding item on the comment letter from the previous hearing, and that one item was in regards to the water table and the determination of the elevation of the water table based on the test pits that were done and where the location of the detention ponds were. I had sent the information off to Mr. Poisson of SW Cole, who reviewed it, and I think he issued a letter today or yesterday, basically concurring with my findings that the groundwater was not in the pond and that it was actually lower than the pond as I had previously calculated. So he agreed, and it took off the one comment that was outstanding on the previous letter.
Okay. We also have a letter, I believe, from the attorney from the abutters. Is that something that we should read into the record?
I think the attorney is here.
I'm here, so I can save you from reading the entirety of it if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff. My name is Adam Costa. I authored the letter that was provided to you late last week. You can see from I presume you have copies of the letter before you, or have had an opportunity to review it. If not, I have additional copies with me as the board member has been able to review the letter.
I believe we have it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Just by way of background, my clients are identified in the letter. I represent a couple that owns adjacent property and then another property a bit further away, but still in relative close proximity to the site that's at issue. But I also want to provide a bit of context in terms of my involvement in the case. So I don't handle many cases of this sort. I don't represent abutters as a general manner of practice. My firm primarily represents municipalities. We represent 36 municipalities across the state, including towns the size of Westport. Occasionally, we represent private clients, developers. We don't do much abutter or neighbor work. We certainly don't represent what I'm sure your board knows are often referred to as NIMBYs, not in my backyard. We just don't want it here. And so what I want to tell you is I'm not here tonight to say that my clients are opposed to the proposal that's before you. They're not opposed to the proposal that's before you. They're not opposed to the development or redevelopment or subdivision of the site that's at issue. But as you can see from my letter, the concerns are with the design of the subdivision that's proposed. And we've essentially I've set out 3 components in the letter that I submitted to the board that address the concerns we have. And they all relate to the stormwater management that's proposed for the subdivision. The subdivision has been designed such that the proposed right-of-way and the actual roadway itself, what's shown on the plan here is Thomas Corey Lane, is immediately adjacent to the boundary with my client's property. And in fact, it's a strip of land that provides access to the rear portion of my client's property, and it's the sole means of access other than an additional easement they have for an existing driveway or pathway that provides them with access. It's the sole means of access and the point of frontage for their property. So their perspective on a proposal like this is, what does it do to our property today? And what does it do to our property in the future? What does it do in terms of potentially affecting our development potential if we ever had a desire to develop our property? And the first thing that stood out to me is you've got a provision in your rules and regulations that indicates, and most communities, most planning boards have similar provisions in their rules and regulations governing subdivisions that say no subdivider can make use of an adjacent property, a property that's not under common ownership, a property over which they don't have control by way of a fee interest or an easement interest, without the permission of that property owner. And what I see when I reviewed the plans, and doesn't show on this plan, but it shows on some of the other sheets that have been supplied to the board, is that the stormwater management system is going to change the flow of stormwater, and essentially, this is the plan that shows it in a much better form, is going to, and I'm no engineer by any means, but I've cited some of this in my letter, it's going to result in point discharges that mean a higher volume of flow and a rate of flow that is different than what exists on the site today. And that's going to place water onto my client's property in a manner that is not being placed onto the property today. The second point I made, and it's a related point, and it was one that was made initially by your own peer review consultant, who pointed out in his initial letter and then in his subsequent letter that this property owner had no easement right or other interest in my client's property to give them the right to be able to do that. And the response initially from the applicant was, we don't need any such right because we have the ability to effectively, reasonably use our property. I don't disagree with that. The doctrine in Massachusetts called the reasonable use doctrine, says that you can adjust and develop a property in such a way that you can alter reasonably the flow of stormwater. You're entitled to reasonably use your property. But even your own engineer, when faced with that response, said, well, that's not exactly what they're doing here. They're proposing these point discharges. This is the area that's most notable here. You can see the spreader that's resulting in stormwater being funneled to these specific locations on the adjacent property that it's not being placed today. And the obvious solution to that, again, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to redesign the proposal that's before you, but the obvious solution is to adjust the design of the subdivision so that some of the stormwater flows are not directed onto my client's property. Now, I understand that's not necessarily a thing that can be done without some challenges. The topography is such that it does flow in the direction of my client's property naturally, but there are stormwater mechanisms that can be employed that would avoid this sort of an issue. And that is the third point that I made in my letter, which is that the law is very clear in Massachusetts, even in the context of the reasonable use doctrine, that property cannot be developed in a manner as is being proposed here. So I'm not just saying it, your own peer review consultant is saying it. So my clients indicated that they had made this known in some form or fashion to the board previously at an earlier meeting. They were aware, and we had a back and forth correspondence with your town staff that this was nearing completion in the eyes of the board, but we wanted to appear, and again, my clients asked me to come down from Newburyport today to say to you that, please, not so fast. We think that there needs to be a redesign of this property so that it won't result in flooding of my client's property today, and what could result in future development limitations on my client's property in the future. They have no plans as I stand here today. They're not coming before you with a subdivision proposal. They have no vision as to how they might use their property tomorrow or next year or in 5 years. But they don't want to be told if they come before you in 5 years to subdivide it that they can't construct a roadway, and this is a point actually made by your own engineer, because in constructing a roadway and elevating that roadway, they're going to then be blocking the flow of stormwater from this property, causing it to flow back onto this property and flooding the roadway that you're going to be permitting as part of the subdivision that's before you tonight. So we would like you to take a closer look at this. We'd like you to heed the advice of your own peer review consultant and ask the applicant to look at some alternatives that would result in a better stormwater design so there wouldn't be effects on the neighboring properties. We're aware, and I've talked to my clients about their appellate rights, but it's always my perspective that rather than wait for a permit like this to issue and then rush off to court and cost the town money, cost the applicant money, it seemed to make sense to have me attend tonight, attempt to make these points known to the board, and hopefully engage in a dialogue and hopefully persuade the applicant to make some adjustments so that we don't realize our worst fears, be it in 6 months or in 5 years.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I do have some questions, but I'm going to defer to the rest of the board first. I think there's, well, unless somebody's ready to go, I would suggest that they are reducing the stormwater from the site that flows naturally onto your client sites by 20%. And I know that it is directed more to a 20-foot level spreader. But I'm not sure that the total amount of water that's going to come from this narrow strip is going to cause something that would trigger denying this application. So anyway, if anybody else wants to go, or Mr. Leach?
If I may, just for the information for the board, so I appreciate Mr. Costa's remarks on this particular project, and I think we discussed at the previous meeting, so I don't want to rehash it and hold everybody up here tonight. So just to reiterate, the 20% reduction, the calculations run and submitted to on the final plans for this that didn't take into account the infiltration because the consultant thought the groundwater was in the bottom of the pond. So we're not even considering the infiltration that will take place. On the 2-year storm, we're reducing it by 51%. On the 100-year storm, we're reducing it by 32%. Flow coming off. Now, the concern is, you need an easement across. Well, if the abutters were to develop their property, they would run into the same problem. Because their water would have to go from here across someone else's property. If the theory of you can't cross, direct stormwater because you're on the top of the watershed, you'd never be able to develop any property on top of the watershed. Every development would have to be at the bottom of the watershed next to the wetlands. So it would be an impossible ability. It's not good engineering to direct water away from one watershed into another watershed. That's not a standard practice. That's not what you usually do. You take the water that's going where it's going and you send it in each direction. In this case, the ridge goes through here. This water all comes through here. This water goes through here, like we discussed before. If they were to build a roadway or a driveway or whatever to get access property in the back, they would still have to deal with that stormwater regardless if this development was taken into account or not. And they would have the same problem. They would need an easement because the water wants to go this way. It's what it does naturally, what it does, and what it's going to continue to do, albeit at a 30 to 50% less than what it is. Now, there isn't much you can do to alleviate that problem because you're sitting on the ridge. There isn't a heck of a lot you can do. You can't, you're on top of the watershed, you're at the bridge point of the watershed. There's very little water coming off this ridge. It's a C-type soils. You heard the other abutter last tell you how great the drainage was here. So in a combination of all these things, the best engineering practice design, it does not affect the ability for this property to develop should they want to do that. They would have to come in if they were to develop this property into the same thing we're doing tonight. They would have to direct water onto another property because they're not against the wetlands. It's just a matter of, all this water comes right down through here and it's going to go right down through here before it's going to go after. But I just want to reiterate that we've reduced it significantly above the 20%. That's required in stormwater regs. Mass stormwater regulations usually don't require a lot of stormwater controls for lots less than 4. In fact, they don't require any. The town of Westport is very strict in their stormwater regulations of what they require the applicants to do. And we've not only met, but exceeded and tried to make this as best we can. We tried to accommodate all the neighbors with the tree and making it so the development is away from the property, not touching the trees that run along the property line that provide an existing screen. I don't know what else we can do at this point. You can't take the water from here and direct it all the way down to there. It's not good engineering practice. That's my argument. I don't know.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I look particularly at this because of the issues raised by the neighbors. And I agree with, this is, the road is just off of the ridge line. The ridge line is running right along parallel with the roadway. And in the very upper part of the roadway, sort of flips over the ridge is actually draining the other direction. And I looked at not only the reduction and I don't see any real practical way of making the water run in another direction. All we can try to do is manage the piece that we have here. And looking at the design storms, and there's only in a 10-year storm, there's only 5 inches of water in these basins. This is not a flood. This is a relatively small amount of water which we're capturing. Even in the 100-year storm, there's in basin number 1, there's only 8 inches of water, and we're now, the 100-year storm is about 9 inches of rainfall, and essentially it's, the basin at its peak is capturing what falls out of the sky. So there really is very little that one could do to direct the water in another direction. And the volumes are small and the reductions are great. So that is significant. And I think it meets the goals that we set up in our regulations.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Jim, excuse me, like Bob, I read the attorney's letter, and it caused me to go back and look more closely at our consultant's letter. And I'm not an engineer, but there are 2 very good engineers here. I'm not a lawyer either. And I guess, but our consultant is an engineer, right? So what troubles me a little bit is everything that I hear seems to make sense. But I just wonder, so what is it, why does our engineer, why has he said in here several times that he feels there's a need for this flow easement as the solution to the problem? And that's what troubled me, and I know that
Excuse me, through the chair, I'm sorry.
This way.
Okay.
Or you know?
yeah, for now.
The concern is, and it concerned me from the first review, was he's formulating an opinion of what is needed on this particular subdivision, not a regulatory opinion. I agree with Mr. Costa that there is a requirement in the regulations, obviously, that if we need an easement, if we were discharging the pipe and needed to run a swale down the road to something else, absolutely. But where you're just recreating a natural flow and reducing it, you don't need to do that. We don't need an easement now. If we could put a driveway in here now, we wouldn't need an easement just to have water flow across someone else's property. Again, the argument is they would have to do the same thing here, because they obviously, water from this side would flow to the next one. That's what happens. Water goes from one property to another to another. It's just the way it is. It's just on this particular one, hence the name Quarry Ridge, it's sitting right on top of the watershed. It straddles two sub-watersheds, and there isn't, you know, directing it around is not a good idea. It changes the whole hydrology this way, the wetlands, which the land trust would have an interest in, but also it takes care of everything going in the other direction. I mean, there isn't much you can do here. And again, we didn't, as Mr. Daler pointed out, we didn't consider the infiltration of these basins. Right now, these basins are 2 feet above the water table. They would infiltrate. So the reduction would be even less than what we calculated, what we used worst case scenario. The fact that Mr. Poisson keeps asking for an easement, I think he's mistaken, and it's an opinion on his point that we need it. Our opinion is we don't need it. I'm sure Mr. Costa's opinion is we do need it. It's an opinion as to, do we need to discharge a pipe across this property to get to some, whatever, some basin or something over here? We don't need to do that. We don't need to have an easement where water's already flowing down.
But part of his observations are that currently the stormwater flows, I think he said, uniformly across the site. And it is, he says, that the current vegetation, the existing vegetation, is sufficient to prevent erosion. And in this plan that you have, the discharge is concentrated on these 3 or 4 points. And I'm not sure if is he also voicing the concern that by concentrating the discharge, even though it's, you say you've reduced the drainage by 20%, there's 80% that is being, and I'm on,
Okay. So
I'm on shaky ground here when I say it. But if that indeed is being funneled through these 3 points, 4 points, is there an erosion control issue being created, potentially?
again, to the chair, I understand the concern, and I'll try to explain hydrology in a very simple manner. He's assuming that all the water is flowing like a sheet coming off here. And that would be true if it was a paved parking lot. But it's not. It's a hummocky field with some, you can see through here, where walls have been removed and water gets directed in all kinds of different directions. Most of this, coming from here, these two areas, comes right through this little scalloped area that you see right here. We're sitting on top of a flat area on top of a ridge. We're not pointing it downhill, we're not, you know, so with this level spreader, when it comes out with this level spreader, and we're not talking a fire hose here, we're talking trickling out a level spreader, it's just gonna meander around just like it does now through the grasses and everything. It's not coming out at a velocity that's, like I said, fire hose type thing. And I know it's a kind of an exaggeration, but it's not coming out at, you know, an 8-inch depth flowing across these things. It's trickling out just like it does now. Hence the concrete level spreader and the stone before. That's the velocity. It's sitting, if you look at the contours, right on top of the level where it just slightly starts turning.
Yeah, but if those two basins fill up with water,
Not really.
you're saying that's not possible?
Well, can they fill up with water if you get 20 inches of rain? Absolutely, but we all have a big problem. The last problem you're going to have is the water coming out of this pond.
We know that there's no norms anymore. Everything has changed.
But if 8 inches of rain falls from the sky, or the Cornell extreme weather events fall from the sky, there'll be some water in this pond, but it's not going to come gushing out 8 inches. That's why you have detention ponds. It slows everything down. You have storage ability, you have an infiltration ability, and the outlet just provides an outlet so it trickles out. We could design a complete pond here, but I don't think anybody's going to like that when it comes to mosquito season.
Well, I'm just trying to, I want to.
I understand the concern.
Sure that, you know, that both parties are, you know, can live with this design. And, I mean, you're a great, good engineer. You're a great, you know, civic-minded man in town here, and I know you don't want to be associated with a design that's caused some problems and friction between.
No, we're not trying to force the development in here, you know, shoehorn the development where it can't be done.
All
I guess, is, you know,
No.
there's 3 lots, 3 new lots here. All of them well over 60,000 square feet. All of them, you won't see the houses. All of them very picturesque settings. I know that's a problem for some of the issues. Anybody over here is not going to see these houses. It's, you know, I've lived in Westport for a few years, and, you know, I've always seen houses go up, and then the issue is, you know, what's going on here, what's causing problems, and for years, subdivisions cause problems. I don't think in the last 25 years, I'll say, the planning board's gotten a grip on all these subdivisions, and there hasn't been the problems that there was years ago. And in this particular case, we have tried to minimize all infrastructure as possible except the ponds, to provide as little impact on the property as possible. A 16-foot gravel drive, pulling it away from the property line over to one side. Like I said, the tree was a concern. We got extra money to send under the road, so we wouldn't affect the tree. You know, there's only so much you can do. There's alternatives to this, and I hate to tell you what they are. There is an alternative to this, but I don't think the board's going to like the alternatives either, where you overdevelop this particular piece of parcel through different ways. This, I think, is the best, other than nobody wants to have anything. These 3 lots, which are nice square lots, nice wide lots, are not pork chop lots. They're not oddly shaped. They're not, you know, ridiculous in any shape and form. They're, you know, very nice sided lots. They'll be right on top of the ridge. Again, not visible from the road, not visible from anybody, because they'll be down the ridge. I think it's a nice development. You know, it's a large piece of land. We're not overbuilding, we're not overdeveloping, I don't believe. I think this is a good design. I mean, it wouldn't be standard if it didn't meet all the requirements that you would require and the state requires. I understand there's an argument the other way, but there's only so much you can possibly do.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Just 1 second. I just wanted to say, I see somebody in the back that wants to speak. We'll get to you in a moment.
Mr. Chairman, the actual development of these lots is actually over the ridge line. That is, whatever the roofs and pavements and yards and all of that for the houses is not flowing in the direction of the water. It's flowing, if you will, back onto their own property. So the development of the lots isn't adding water. And just, you know, forget that it's a subdivision. Suppose the owner of this decided, you know, I'd like to live in the back. I'd like to build my house in the back, and I'm going to build a gravel driveway like this gravel driveway. He doesn't need a T-turn around at the end, but he builds the same gravel driveway and he puts his house over the ridge, his new house over the ridge where that is. But that gravel driveway would not be before us. It's an as-of-right use. If he decided to build his home there, he has an absolute right to do that. It wouldn't come before us to go to the building inspector. Now, with such a gravel driveway, and it wouldn't have any stormwater basins, it wouldn't have any controls, would that alter the natural sheet flow drainage? Probably. But, you know, it would be essentially the equivalent, that if you could do an as-of-right activity that we would not be able to regulate. And now there's a subdivision proposal which actually has more protection than if he could do his own driveway. I think there's a concern about flooding that is understandable, and I agree with the concern, and I'm not, this is not being made up. Yes, there will be some alteration here, but they're taking, the petitioner is taking great protections. And to think he could have an as-of-right use that actually has greater impacts than what the subdivision has.
Again, through the chair, we could do 3 flexible frontage lots here with the same thing in a shorter road. And again, no controls, it's a by right thing. This is the best for safety, public access, the whole thing. And again, we're providing easement to the cemetery and doing things that the town desires. We're trying to work with the town.
Thank you. And the 1 minute with that?
Can I speak from here?
No. And so please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Linda Nanny. I own the property, 2 properties away from this property. And I'm also represented by Mr. Costa. I have 2 points. For the record, I would just like to confirm that Mr. Leach is an engineer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because it wasn't clear to me that you were. And then secondly, I would like to make the point that there is already erosion on the existing road that is called Angeline Lane. And we see it in large storms. And when you speak of 100-year storms, you know, there's data to show that that's now a 10 to 20-year storm, not a 100-year storm. And we see it whenever there's a large rain. There's this erosion path that happens, and it comes from that particular area right there. So we already see it, and we believe that this point source discharge of water is going to just make it worse.
Could you point where the point is,
Right.
where you see it?
Right here. Is that correct?
Also down.
Right, I mean, Clem could speak more directly to that, but it goes into the driveway of the garage.
At the end, up at the front, there's a
This one?
There's a culvert that goes underneath the driveway.
You're gonna have to point it out because,
Okay, let's have one at a time.
yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, there's another point source. Down here. It's hard to see on here, but it's
Could
coming
you
out
please
here.
identify yourself first?
Sorry.
Correctly.
Jacques Brunswick, we own the property adjacent to this. So I just wanted to point out that there's I think it's this one here comes through, and this right here is the Angeline lane.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Again, for the record, Adam Costa, I'll be brief. I appreciate you providing me another opportunity to speak. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to go sort of tit for tat. You know, I appreciate I'm not an engineer, you're not an attorney, right? So, but I think we got a little off course when we start talking about other options, as of right options versus overdevelopment options, right? Again, to go back to, and there's a reason why I started my presentation earlier the way that I did. My clients aren't opposed to development of the site. They're not opposed to a 3-lot subdivision. The issue is the manner in which the driveway is being proposed and whether the stormwater management system that's been designed and proposed to accompany it is going to alleviate their concerns with respect to stormwater. I hear these generic statements made, and I wrote one of them down as I heard it, that we're just recreating a natural flow. I think what your engineer is telling you is that that's not what's being done here. They're not recreating a natural flow. They're creating a new artificial flow through these point source discharges. And the result is that the water is going to end up in different locations on my client's property. So I appreciate the difficult position the board is in. You're hearing one thing from the applicant and the applicant's representatives. You're hearing something different from the neighbors and the neighbor's representative. Again, when I represent boards like yours, I always advise the board, view whatever you hear from the applicant with a bit of caution, and do the same thing with everything you hear from the neighbors and from their council. What you should be deferring to, however, respectfully, is what your own engineer is saying to you, because that's the only person that you're paying to review this proposal and to give you advice that's beholden to you. They're not prejudiced by providing you with a perspective that is going to benefit the applicant. They're not prejudiced by giving you a perspective that's going to benefit the neighbors. They're reviewing this and they're making recommendations. And what do I see when I read the neighbors' letters, and there's 2 of them? I see this statement that drainage easements adequately sized for these discharge points crossing the 2 neighboring properties to the wetland area need to be procured. It was definitive. It didn't say should be or we'd recommend, need to be procured. Then he reviewed the revisions to the design. What did he say? Pre-construction surface flows are spread out over 700 feet. However, flows are now still concentrated. And then he talks about some risks that could accompany that. So these are not my words. I'm not telling you this. I would say the same thing. It benefits my client. I'm not saying these things. I'm pointing you to the letters from your own engineer that you're paying to advise you on what you should do in a circumstance like this. And your engineer is effectively advising you against it in the absence of an easement. And to be clear, I know that there were statements my clients made to me. They thought there might be a perception by the board or by board members that we were trying to, this was a money grab. We want to require the applicant to get an easement, that we're going to put a $100,000 price tag on it. My clients don't want to grant an easement. My clients are concerned about development potential for their property and what this could mean. They have no interest in granting an easement. They're not offering an easement. What they're asking is that a solution be devised so that the stormwater is not being isolated to these point source discharges, such that the natural flow is being altered in such a significant way that it's going to be causing flooding in different locations on the property. I don't dispute that the overall volume of water is going to be decreased. I saw those numbers in the filings that were made as well. I saw the 20% reference. I'm hearing now the numbers could be as high as 30 to 50%. That's great news that there's going to be less water coming off the site. I'm not surprised by that. Again, I sit with boards, I represent developers. I know what engineers can do, and very often post-development volumes are reduced from pre-development volumes. But what I'm hearing is that the nature of the flow off the site is going to be meaningfully different, and that's a concern.
Thank you. I think that from my perspective, I pointed out the same issue, that it was turning into more of a point source than spread out in the beginning before we even got to the engineer's letter. But I've been convinced that there's not that much water coming off of this. And secondly, I know that your clients would not give an easement. I don't think that we have done any subdivisions that required easements here. If somebody could fact check me, and I don't think it's something that we are in the business of grant or requiring easements off of other people's property. Because the water normally goes that way, and yes, it's altered, but water from any site that we deal with, the water flow is altered. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, you do this all the time. I'm sure that the water is always different when there's a development upstream than previous to the development. And from my own perspective, I would defer to the planners and let them tell me what they know about easements like this. Is there a requirement to do an easement in a case like this, from your perspective?
From my perspective is that what we're trying to do with the subdivision regulations is ensure that the controls of the stormwater runoff are located on the applicant's parcel. And all of the controls of the stormwater are located on that parcel. There may be, runoff just due to, as the applicant's consultant was saying, that, the stormwater will continue to drain through the basin as it would through any other parcel. But all of the stormwater controls are on the applicant's parcel, and they're also meeting the subdivision standards for having a 20% reduction of those stormwater flows from the pre-construction calculations. Mm-hmm. And so if all the stormwater controls are located on that property, I would not say that they would be required to have an easement. Because typically you would have that easement in order to service those stormwater controls on a different property.
which we don't have. We don't have a pipe running across, like the applicant's engineer was saying, we don't have it running somewhere else. It's just the stormwater is reconnected, although quite a bit reduced. Anyway, anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, also, I think we are tending to use the point source designation, I won't say incorrectly. I mean, it is changed, but this, this drawing we have here is a little confusing. The leader from the note that says what the invert elevation is pointing to a point. The pipes coming out of these basins are not directed onto the abutters property. The pipes coming out of these basins are directed into swales or level spreaders of some attempt to diffuse the concentration. So it is not the equivalent of a point source in which there is a pipe running into the abutters property. Is it completely equivalent to sheet flow? No, it's not completely equivalent to sheet flow. But does it meet our regulations? I believe it does meet our regulations.
Manager.
I would agree with my colleague, and also looking at the existing contours, where the water's coming out, there is a natural, it's gonna go where it was always going, when it comes out to attention ponds. And then the abutter, when he made mention of the point source on the bend of the road, the water that the developer is dealing with is his water coming out of his property, which would be the same kind of situation if they were gonna build a road on the other side of that. So they're actually, correcting some issues there with that. I mean, I think it's an excellent plan, and I don't think anybody's gonna have any issues. I'm pretty confident. I've seen a lot of Sean's work, and I really think they're gonna be happy. I think that the whole idea of making this fit into the neighborhood, which when they first came here, what they were trying to do, has been achieved. I really think it's an excellent plan.
I'm only still at the microphone, Mr. Chairman, because you asked the question, which I'm sure you thought was rhetorical, but I was here to sort of answer it, or to sort of pose an additional question. So your question was to your staff whether your board had previously required easements in circumstances like these. And my question, and I think I know the answer to it because I've discussed it with my clients and they've done a bit of due diligence, but my question to the board is there precedent for what is being proposed here? So has the board approved subdivisions similar to what's designed here, where you have these point source discharges, whether they be whatever diffusing device is used, whether it's a level spreader or otherwise, where the discharge point is in immediate proximity to and aimed toward, and I realize it's not physically on the adjacent property, but it's immediately adjacent to the property, whether it's what we see here, where this is a bit deceiving because you do have that detention basin area, but if you were to scroll up and you look in the area of the level spreader, in that instance, it's immediately adjacent to the property boundary. So I don't know, we weren't able to find a similar instance. Maybe you're aware of them. Certainly I don't practice enough before your board to be able to pull out of my hat examples if you haven't done it or not done it. But it seemed to me, and it seemed to my clients based upon their due diligence, like this is not something that's been done in Westport before.
So again, we have a situation where, ideally, you like to dump your stormwater into a wetland, so there's no wetland in here. So we did have this situation when I first got on board with one of the clients on 177 and North Mill Road. That whole site discharges into Westport, onto the town road. I would say it's pretty much a similar situation.
I agree. John?
I've listened to the concerns expressed by the abutters. Previous owner of this land owned it for a long time, now seeing it develop. And also listened to the attorney. And I also see and try and keep in mind that the way I look at it, we're looking at the drainage of a driveway, not house lots, because the house lots are on the other side of the ridge. This is a driveway built of a permeable surface. I think, you know, that's going, with the retention basins reducing the flow of water, and where all the tools being used to deal with the runoff are on the property of the developer. And I think according to the planner, this meets our rules. I understand the various concerns, but I think this is not going to be a problem, but that's my take.
Thank you. Planners? What do you say?
A recommendation?
The recommendation, we recommend that you approve the subdivision, since it meets the standards of our subdivision rules and regulations.
On a motion, Mr. Chair?
Please, I'd like a motion to close the hearing.
I move we close the public hearing for Quarry Ridge Estates.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Want another motion?
Yes, please.
I move to approve the definitive subdivision plan entitled Definitive Subdivision Quarry Ridge Estates, subject to, we have findings that have been,
Well, we have conditions, the basic ones for the homeowners association, and we also have the 4 waivers that we're
Okay.
asking for.
Can you read the waivers?
Yeah. Waiver from the right-of-way clearing, waiver from standard cross-section, waiver from the required paved surface, and a waiver from the street line intersection on one side for the radius of 25 feet.
that's my motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Next up is the 6:30 public hearing for 720, 726 Old County Road, file number 24-003 SP-CD, continued from April 2nd and May 21st of this year. The applicant has requested a modification to the special permit common driveway. The applicant is requesting a continuance to August 13th, 2024 at what time?
At 6:15 p.m.
6:15.
Want a motion, Mr. Chair? I move to continue the public hearing for 720, 726 Old County Road, August 13 at 6:15.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Do we have any more of the planners report?
No, I will have probably lots more grant updates next month, but
I think Westport Stone and Sand has contacted me to get the final inspection for that solar project, so that should be coming off the books soon.
Good. Have you been, anybody out there to see it? No?
No, I just got the as-built today from the developer, so I sent them over to SW Cole. So I think he should, if not this week, probably next week, he'll get out to review it.
All right.
Could I ask, that you had a nice table that summarized the solar, large-scale solar systems that have come before the board. It showed whether they were, approved and whether they had been completed or whether they were still, not started or whatever. I mean, sort of gave a status report. And it would be nice to have that updated so we just sort of see where things stand.
I think there's like an active table in one of the Google Drives that's like
Okay.
somewhere.
That's a very good idea, because it seems like they take forever to get the connection permits. I mean, years.
That one was from 2018, so.
But they take years to get a source connection permit.
From NSTAR.
Well, both Eversource and National Grid are going through a big process to upgrade their whole systems to have enough capacity to, number one, receive electricity from the ocean, and to provide enough power when everybody gets an electric car and everybody switches over to, what do you call it?
Hydrogen. No.
Electric heat. Electric heat in the form of
Heat pumps.
Heat pumps. And so I've sat in on two of these things at Serpent Commission meetings, and they're really, really involved, and they're spending millions and millions of dollars doing it. And I think they're doing that right now of all places on Old Harbor Road. They're replacing all the telephone poles and putting big sets of wires up high, all the way. They've been doing it for 2 months on Old Harbor Road. And now they're coming down Cross Road. And I don't know why the harbor, I mean, it seems like other places where that more requirement for that, but I guess their services were so old. Couldn't do it. But anyway, it certainly is employing a lot of Westport cops. And I also got an email from Audubon asking us to support this new bill that Senator Rodriguez has for the new energy / wind / solar. And this is the bill. It's 96 pages long. And I said, geez, I gotta read it. I mean, and you can't even understand it because it keeps on referring back to the existing laws and it's changing this paragraph and this word, and it is.
Is this a solar panel, not in, on farm?
Not on farmland.
Yeah.
So,
This sounds good because it says, don't do it in forests, save the trees, and do it in developed areas, like New Bedford and stuff.
yeah.
But as you know, as we've all done, a lot of the ones in forests have come from farmers who want extra money for farms. And so it's not as obvious. I mean, on one level, oh yeah, well, we don't want to take down trees, but those requests are from farmers. And so when I looked at it, I said, well, this isn't as obvious as it, yeah, sure, you want to put them over the parking at Lee's, or the Ports Neck parking, that would all be great. But
Where else? I mean, it's the
Yeah.
place in Westport.
yeah,
Maybe the high school parking lot.
yeah.
So,
But the
yeah, so I'm not gonna send a letter of support to anybody until they can understand what that interest is. And I've sent copies to these two, and hopefully they're gonna tell me what it's all about.
And Mark and I went
We have
out
about the same problem, you know.
I'll print it.
because there's all kinds of stories now about dual use.
Yeah.
You know, about, I don't know where the last one, the Globe, about sheep going under, you know,
Cows too.
yeah, cows.
And people are growing stuff that isn't so sun sensitive.
Yeah.
So,
One of the suggestions I made to Michael and Amy was that we might consider tweaking again our own solar bylaw. I mean, we did it recently to reduce the number of acres, but should we consider an adjustment that might give an incentive to, in fact, develop more acres if it's on already, you know, if it's not taking down forests. If you are destroying, if you are using forests, then it would be, what is it now? Our minimum is, or maximum is 12. Yeah, so 12 acres with forests. But if they wanted to do 16 acres or something, and they're installing these panels on already disturbed property, it would be an incentive.
Mark, I think our bylaw says that we can add the acreage, add up to 50% of the acreage if we find that it isn't detrimental.
Oh, okay, well,
I think, isn't that what it says?
I believe
Something
that's
to that
it.
effect, yeah. You could also look at soil types too, to see what kinds of soil types are on site and incentivize or disincentivize development of like prime agriculture versus, you know, just standard soils, so.
Some of the farmers in the ag town have turned a little bit and said, you know, these leases to the solar companies are only 20 years. If we have the solar farm and then they decide to go away, we have cleared land, we could possibly farm.
one of the, I think it was you, John, who suggested, I don't think it's the greatest site available, but it's not, I think it'd be a bit difficult lift because it's state property, is to put big installation solar array over the parking lot at
Oh, yeah,
Horseneck Beach.
It's a
And,
natural.
oh my God, there's acres of parking there. And by the way, you know, they're repaving the whole thing.
Yeah.
And as my wife said, oh, that's great, just before the hurricane season. But one of the things about that is that these enormous 18-wheelers filled with binder course or something, whatever stage they're in now, are coming down Route 88 and then turning left on Hicks Bridge Road instead of continuing straight down 88 and going to the Horseneck Beach parking lot.
Because of the bridge.
Apparently, I mean, I drove in there yesterday and I asked for a supervisor. There wasn't one available, or trucks standing around, but nobody in them. And, but all these big 18-wheelers were pulling in one after another. But one fellow came over in a big loader. He was very nice, and I asked him that question. I said, you're coming down, why are they all being diverted down Horseneck Road, which for those size vehicles is a narrow road. There are walkers, there are joggers, there are bikers. When you've got a straight shot, and it probably would cut the time in half. His answer was apparently that he understood that it's the bridge, the Fontaine Bridge, has a maximum load capacity, and these trucks exceed that. I find that's...
What, Hicks Bridge is stronger than...
yes.
Hicks Bridge is stronger than...
Yeah. And
It's
so,
kind of hard to...
Yes.
so
And then they have to go across East Beach Road?
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, well, they're flattening it out now a bit. But, and I believe and I hope that on the return trip, you know, they're lighter now, they can go back over the bridge, but coming down over all the way down Horseneck Road is enormous.
That is
and
nuts.
it's a conduit.
That is nuts.
Truckloads across East Beach, aren't they? Fix East Beach, well, they're there.
Well, that's what I thought when I followed this truck, I turned around because I said, where are they going? So I followed him, and I thought, he gets down toward Bayside, and I thought, oh, maybe they're actually repairing East Beach Road. But no, he kept going past the trailers and around the corner and all the way back up toward the entrance to the parking lot, to the Horseneck Beach parking lot. It's amazing.
Mr. Chair, you want a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those trucks weigh 100,000.